So you may have heard about the recent uproar around Unity, and I wanted to explain a little bit more what this means in depth from the perspective of a game designer, somebody who actually works with Unity, somebody whose livelihood is somewhat on the line as a result. So Unity recently announced that they are basically going to be adding a 20-cent fee onto every single install for every game that uses their platform. Obviously, they were going to carve out a lot of exemptions for this. So basically, you would not owe this fee unless your game had a certain number of installs or was making a certain amount of money first. But then after that point, you would start owing them this fee, and this would include retroactively games that were previously made in the Unity engine, which is a lot of them. So to understand, Unity is a very powerful engine that is used by something like 70% of the industry. It is the most popular engine by far. And in particular, it is kind of the most popular engine amongst indie games, lower budget games, mobile games, games that in many ways would not be able to pay that fee very easily, let's be quite honest. And this obviously sparked a great controversy. There's a huge uproar about it on the internet. They've since walked back some of this, but not all of it. And I'm gonna go ahead and argue on Unity's side to make myself the devil really quickly, which is to say that Unity is, again, it's an engine, it's a platform that people use to make video games. So an engine is basically like a program that you can use to build a video game with. It makes it a lot easier to build a video game. When you talk about major studios, they can build their own engines. But then that obviously takes a lot of time, so most smaller studios rely on using existing engines like Unity, Unreal, and so on to make their video games in. And of course, many times as a game developer, you may really only know one of those engines. For example, I've really only ever worked in Unity. I've never worked in Unreal. Kind of sucks if I were then forced to switch over to Unreal because Unity was not something that was usable. And being in the engine business is not actually a terribly profitable business. It's not been terribly profitable for Unity, and so you can kind of understand, in a general sense, why Unity would want to try and make more money off of an engine, which again, supports like 70% of the market, a massive percentage of the market. So you can see why, you're sitting on a gold mine, you've got a lot of people using your product is not making a lot of money, you should probably try raising prices a bit. Now, that said, this is obviously a really insanely draconian way to try and raise prices. Really, really awful concept. So basically, first of all, Unity has to know every time the game is installed, which means that basically Unity has to have some kind of built-in spyware that is paying attention to your video game, how many times it's installed, how many devices it's installed on, and so on. And then, of course, there was a lot of uproar because there was not very good clarification on what exactly counts as an install. So, for example, you could have somebody that purchases the game once, but then they install it on multiple devices. Maybe they've got a laptop and a PC. Maybe you install something on multiple different phones because you've got a new phone. Whatever the case is, it feels a little bit punishing that somebody should have to pay that 20-cent fee multiple times for a single user who's simply installing it on multiple devices. Or perhaps they've uninstalled it and they've reinstalled it. How do we know that Unity's spyware can tell the difference? We're not sure, because again, this is incredibly invasive of your privacy, and this would involve software that is pretty far-reaching in terms of what it can do, so that it can actually check on you. This goes against a lot of these sort of trend towards greater privacy that we've been seeing in recent years, something like the way that Apple decided to deprecate their old fingerprinting system so that essentially we had a lot more options to control our own privacy and ensure that, we get to control what kinds of data gets sent to the people that make the apps that we use. And of course, this goes against that, right? It's Unity saying okay, let's invade your privacy a lot more so that we can see how you're downloading things exactly, tell, how it's different that you've downloaded this thing here and whatnot. Now, the next thing here is to give you an understanding of essentially how this fee would impact different people very differently. So let's say that you make an indie game, you sell it on Steam, you charge, say, $10, something like that, and now you say that, Unity is going to charge you an extra 20 cents per install. And assuming that they can, only figure out how to charge you precisely once for, potentially that person installing the thing multiple times, that just basically means that you need to add 20 cents to your end cost, right? So now you've got to charge $10.20 or maybe round it up to, some other number, whatever, so that you can offset that cost. Okay, not terrible, not the end of the world, mostly fine. But when it comes to mobile games, and a lot of mobile games use Unity, there's a very different equation going on here. So when you have a mobile game, typically there's a very different life cycle than what you have with a typical console PC game. Mobile games tend to be free, and because they're free, basically the way that it works is not that you are trying to get someone to purchase the game, it is that you're trying to get them to install this game for free. Your competition is every other free game out there. Barrier to entry is very low because, again, it is free. All you have to do is install it. So you're competing with a crap ton of other free games, all of which want your attention. And then, of course, you're hoping that that person will then install the game, like the game, keep playing the game, ultimately watch ads, buy in-app purchases that are then going to then, pay you back for them having made the game. And, of course, at the same time, you're going to have to, at some point, get that person to play your game, which you're typically going to do with advertising. And that means that there are two very important numbers to understand as a mobile game developer. The first is the CPI, or cost per install. That is the cost that it takes you in advertising dollars to get a person on average to install your game. There are lots of ways that you can try and keep your cost per install low, which includes things like basically just, having a very good game that a lot of people want to play, that is, is viral, has sharing features, whatever, so you get free installs off of that. Having good advertisements, having a good theme, a good match between the theme and the gameplay and so on. All of this stuff can help in terms of keeping your cost per install low. The second number is the LTV, or lifetime value, which is essentially the average amount of money that you get out of your players. So, of course, of all the installs that you get, a large chunk of those people, probably like 50%, are going to install the game, they're going to try it out, and they're never going to play it again. That's just kind of the reality of things. So about 50% of your people are probably going to be lost in like the first day or two. Then after that, more and more people drop off, but you'll have a smaller percentage that stick around that really like the game. They play it for 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, and so on. And then a smaller percentage of those people are going to actually spend money. And so, of course, you have money incoming from, advertisements as long as people are in the game. And you, of course, also have some people that spend money on in-app purchases. Pretty small percentage, 5%, something like that, of your overall players will spend money. And of course, what happens is that you add up all that and you get something which is the average lifetime value. So you may have some people that spend quite a lot in in-app purchases, but you may have a lot of people who spend, basically nothing, don't watch any ads, you get nothing out of them. So it all averages out. And what you have then is you have your CPI, which is the cost to get a player, and you have your LTV, which is the money that you get out of a player. And of course, what you want is for those two numbers, you want that CPI to be lower than that LTV. So long as that is the case, you're making money. You are printing money. You have a machine that prints money. All you have to do is keep putting more advertising dollars into that machine, and it is going to keep popping out more free money for you. Now, of course, there are limitations to that. There are things like the fact that CPIs will change a lot from season to season. You might have situations where, for example, you spend a lot of money on advertising dollars, you saturate your specific market a little bit, and as a result, you get a diminishing return on, spending more money for a little while. A lot more complicated factors. But basically, again, at the end of the day, what you want is that CPI to be low, you want that LTV to be high, you want the difference between those two to be big, and of course, as a result, you make more and more money per user. Now, at the same time, what does a 20-cent fee from Unity per install look like? Well, first of all, that means that your CPI is now 20 cents higher. A CPI might be something like $1, $2. That's a pretty significant increase to your CPI before you even get started. Pretty big. And it's important to understand that there are different kinds of games with different genres, different types of players that play them. There are some games that will have very high CPIs, but also very high LTVs, strategy games, hardcore games that people tend to get really stuck into. And then there are games that have very, very, very low CPIs, very, very low LTVs, but they can still, have a positive LTV to CPI ratio, and so they're still going to be making money. Now, those people that rely on games where they have super cheap CPIs, super low LTVs, they're relying on basically small margins, right? Like they are relying on the fact that they can make a few pennies at a time and they can just keep the system going and they can keep churning in more users, keep making a little bit more money than they spent, and thus keep making, the system rolling. And that means that there are entire segments of the game industry that if you were to charge them 20 extra cents per install, their game would just no longer be financially viable. It would just collapse. There are entire, there are entire games that have gone, like super viral, that are super popular, whatever, get a crap ton of free installs, and then don't monetize very well. It just is what it is. And those kinds of games would be incredible. Like you would just basically end up owing Unity a lot more money than you made on those games. It would just make, again, super large chunks of the market essentially, just impossible. You could not keep making those kinds of video games. And that would obviously be a huge problem. It would really limit the kinds of video games that can get made. There were a lot of very, very, very silly things. So basically, there were people saying, okay, so if this fee applies to my video game, do I have to pay it or does my publisher have to pay it? The publisher will typically take care of advertising and all that sort of stuff. And basically, he says, oh yeah, it's totally fine. You don't have to pay it. Your publisher has to pay it. You just have to work out a deal with them. Which is to say, if I go to my publisher and I say, hey publisher, by the way, I've got this super popular game. I've got X number of installs, which means you owe Unity X divided by 5 number of dollars. They're gonna say, fuck you. Like, publishers are not going to greenlight many kinds of games. They're not going to work with many kinds of developers, specifically because they recognize that kind of fee would make, that kind of relationship untenable, right? They're only going to, just like anybody else, publishers are only going to work with you if they see an economic benefit to doing so. They're not going to do so if this means that they are shouldered with a huge burden of owing Unity a ton of money on your behalf, right? Like, that's so silly. That is so silly that Unity is just like, oh yeah, like, just don't worry about it. Your publisher will take care of it. What? Like, that's incredible. That's so incredible. Like, you didn't think about that? You didn't think about the fact that this is going to have, like, a serious chilling effect in terms of just like how much publishers want to do with game devs. Incredible. Hey folks, Editing Adam here. I also entirely forgot, and this is very silly, the fact that, again, referring back to the part where this is retroactive, this means that you, as a developer, could, just be told, hey, by the way, this game that you had that got a bunch of installs previously, which is now still on the App Store, you could owe us, thousands, millions in back fees for this game, which, obviously you probably don't have because you weren't, factoring that into your decision when you were making the game. You spent all that money on other things and so on. Like, that money is gone. It cannot now be given to Unity, right? Yeah, that's incredible. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that, like, Unity is dead. This doesn't mean this is the final nail in the coffin. This doesn't mean that they're actually going to go through with this plan. Again, obviously, they have been trying to walk back this discussion quite a bit. They have been, hedging. They've been trying to figure out something that works better for everybody. And again, I do think in some ways, Unity does deserve to be able to make a bit more money off of their platform. I don't know if a fee like this is a good idea. I don't think it is. I think that a fee like this, would basically destroy the industry that it's created. You can say that because they have 70% of the market, they have, they can call the shots. They get to decide these things. But at the same time, there are alternatives, right? Like there are, nobody wants to learn another game engine, but they will do so if it means it is feasible for them to make kinds of games that would be impossible to make in Unity because of this fee structure, right? And so that would then, very likely it would be something where, it's not just them calling the shots, it's also them sort of digging their own grave, right? Like some people would pay the fee because they would think that, they'd run the math and they'd find that it's worth it for their particular game. But a lot of other people would run the math. It would not be worth it for their particular game. And they would then be forced to pick up a new engine, move on, etc. So that is all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good week.